just starting off, just for those who are unfamiliar, you're the founder and executive director of the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association. You're a lifelong community activist and advocate for underserved communities, an attorney by training with a demonstrated commitment to and a career in public service, and have a list of accolades. So when I went back to just trying to compile everything from educational history to advocacy history, there's a myriad of things that you have done for this community, which is absolutely amazing and extremely appreciated. I know on my end, my peers and other members of the community. Um, I remember reading in a profile piece, I think it was on Cannabis Maryland, that they said your patient story underscores how one's being a medical cannabis patient in no way compromises professional achievement and success. So would you be comfortable kind of going into a little bit about your patient story and how that served as the foundation for your advocacy work?
Yeah, it's really at the foundation of everything that I do, because without medical cannabis, I wouldn't be able to have any sort of type of career. My medical issues were so challenging that I had trouble getting out of bed and walking. The pain was so intense, I couldn't think the way that I needed to be able to properly analyze the types of things that I'm doing. I'm representing people who sometimes their life is at stake.
Right.
And that's very serious, obviously. And people, for whom these issues significantly impact their life, even if it's not their life ending. And you need to be sharp and focused and able to move and get where you need to be. And I wasn't able to do that.
Right.
And so because of medical cannabis, because of the now medical regimen that I've been able to discover on my own and figured out on my own, I am able to start doing those things again, which is very exciting for me. In addition to just all the other things I get to do in my life, like, run around with my kids and things like that.
Right. No, I definitely understand. I mean, one of the things that surprised me just coming into the industry was the community that existed that kind of existed in such a state of selflessness. I don't think I've met too many people in this industry that have not been patients and advocates almost at the same time. To every single degree, it's like I maybe started as a patient, but I realized how much this could help someone that I cared about, or I realized how much this was doing for me, and I realized that I need to campaign for this right for other people, or this has led me to a greater understanding of what social equity means, or just a list of different things. So it's really amazing to hear just how those parallels exist and how much they overlap.
Yeah, everything starts with our health, right? If our body is not healthy, we can't enjoy or do any of the things. We can enjoy the people that we love.
Sure.
So we really have to make sure that this vessel that we've been given to walk around in can get us where we need to be, so we can do all of the things that we want to do.
Definitely. So in regards to that, kind of moving into the organization as a whole, can you tell me a little bit about the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association, how it began, and how the mission of the organization maybe has changed or evolved over the years, just based on where you see the needs of the community being?
So the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association was founded just last year in November 2019. We're not even a year old. We were born out of a lack, really. There are, we're lucky in Maryland to have such a robust market. We have a lot of businesses that truly care about their patients, but that doesn't mean that there isn't the need for improvement. And so what I personally found, and what I was hearing everywhere I was going, I would go out to events to try to meet people, to get, more engaged with my community. It's the community that taught me more about the plant. And so, but what I was hearing time and time again was how people weren't having their needs met in various ways, whether it's because you can only find the product that you need at one dispensary, or it's in some, other faraway geographic location, or it's made with ingredients that you can't have, or we don't know what we're going to find when we get there because it changes all the time. So I was having those same challenges. And as someone who deals with chronic, incurable medical challenges, I need consistency. And so you know, recognizing as a trained attorney that we can encourage people to do these things, we can ask them to do them, but at the end of the day, it's about the policies and regulations that are in place. And it's about whether or not our policymakers, ranging from our legislators, our delegates and senators, to the governor, to our commissioners, to the staff at the MMCC, that they understand what it truly means to be a patient. And a patient that relies on this plant, to keep going, to function. We know that, I'm not unique. There's nothing unique about my story. And that's what should really be so shocking to everyone.
Right.
Is that there are so many people who could be up here telling you the exact same story. And that's why we know that we need to have a voice for those patients. We need to elevate that voice. And so, I had legislators who didn't know we paid cash. And so, these very things that, we need to educate them about the plant so that they understand it truly is medicine. We need to educate them about how the market is working in a practical way, right? We know how it's supposed to work. We see COMAR, we see the provisions, we see the policies coming out of the commission, but in practice, sometimes things are different.
Right.
And we need to be that voice to let them know what that is. And so that's where the association came from a need to kind of bridge that gap from our patient communities to our policymakers. And as an attorney, it just kind of felt like a natural thing to do. And we've grown to now have a board. We have a 9-person board. We have some advisors that help us out in the background. We are still looking for a few more board members. And we're working hard to get some legislation, we hope, sponsored for this upcoming session.
I mean, you mentioned the board. I mean, the board of directors for the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association really does kind of include a who's who when it comes to those who are actively doing the work and campaigning for the rights of patients, for the needs of patients, and for the greater needs of the cannabis community as a whole. And I know that includes, Kevin Ford, Paulette Smith, Eric Stamper, Hope Wiseman, Ann Allworth. I want to make sure I don't forget anybody. Keisha Reed, Trisha Sheffield, Andrew Strong, and Ashley Wynn Grimes. I think I got everybody.
Yes. And Ashley Wynn Grimes is actually the chair of our board. And we also recently added a new board member, Sharissa Jackson, who's from AMVETS. So she is she's trained as a nurse. She was a veteran in the military. She's a really great spokesperson. She's going to be a really welcome addition to the board.
And, you have all of these people that are united under this banner of advocacy, but how did all of you kind of initially come together? Was it you reaching out and outlining what this need was and how, these people that existed in these disparate positions could come together and really affect change? Or, what was kind of the process of all of you coming together?
It did. So initially, I had just a few people that I was chatting with. They're kind of some advisors. They're in fields that necessarily aren't too cannabis friendly. So they kind of played a background role in helping me get the association up off the ground in terms of forming it, the legalities, the finances, kind of just the bones of the association. Once we had that up and running, we started with a couple of events to kind of test the waters to see how people, policymakers really, whether they would even welcome that sort of thing. So we had 2 legislative event days at the House of Delegates last session in February. They went really fantastic. I was very happy with the turnout and how happy everyone was with the events. And the board actually got formed after that. So COVID hit and there was so a little bit of restructuring. And we decided to go ahead and go with a board. And so the first board was appointed. Members now will be appointed and approved by the board, but the first board was appointed by me. And, over the past, at that point, it had been about a year and a half that I had been in Maryland medical cannabis and meeting with people, talking with people, getting to know folks, working with them on various projects, chatting about ideas, learning about their communities and their needs. The folks on our board just seemed like a really natural fit, and everyone really works so well together, which is the nice thing. People are knowledgeable, they're open, they're really there for patients, and that's it. So it's a really great board. I feel really lucky to have their support.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we we're familiar with, many of the people that are on the board. We've had the privilege of meeting them, like, Eric Stamper, for instance. We've worked with him on veterans initiatives. But what are some of the other kind of intersections that, having this type of representation on the board helps to address?
Well, I think that's what's so important, because we have to remember, and I need to check the recent numbers, there might even be an update, but the last time I checked, there was over 110,000 patients in the state of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a massive number, and
Right.
there's no patient directory that anyone can tap into to reach all of those patients, except for the MMCC, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But as patient advocates and organizations, we don't necessarily have access to that. And so that's always the challenge, is how do we reach the patients? We can have a really stellar program to offer, but if no one signs up, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to reach our patients. And I think that that's where the beauty of our board comes in, is that everyone is from various communities. And while we all know each other and we work together on various things, we, in some ways, have a very distinct community that we're working on behalf of.
Mm-hmm.
And so each member brings that collective experience, that voice from their community, to really try to create this microcosm of Maryland medical cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same way, so that we can also distribute information to each respective community. So it was really important to me that our board reflect as much as possible and that's the challenge. We don't know exactly what our patient demographic looks like, but
Right.
what we believe, or what we at least believe the interest to be. And then, of course, we're always open to people letting us know, like, hey, we need this too. Like I said, we have some more open board seats. So, we're looking to round out our board as well. We're very open, open door policy, very transparent. It's really just about the patient and moving that voice forward.
Definitely, definitely. So how do you feel, and maybe you can also speak to some of the conversations that you've had with the board, within the organization, how do you all feel that the landscape of the industry here in Maryland has changed since the inception of your organization? I mean, where do you think the improvements have been made towards more patient-centered service and advocacy work? And where do you feel where some of the deficiencies are that still needs to be addressed?
One of the things I think that's been really impressive is seeing, anytime a business gets started, you have kind of the nuts and bolts that you have to deal with and get up and going before you can focus on some other related but kind of tangential programming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, now that the industry has kind of settled a little bit and people have the business mechanics and legal mechanics and things down, it's been really great to see these various patient-focused type programming that various businesses are doing. So whether it's offering online classes about ways that you can consume your cannabis, this is what tinctures are, this is what you can do for autism, things like that. I've also seen kind of focused groups. For example, some businesses are having a group for parents
Mm-hmm.
who have a child with medical cannabis. And, obviously we have COVID, there are different restrictions now, but there was even, an event and you could go and sit there. And so just to be able to create that kind of atmosphere, because we know that as medical cannabis patients, there still is very much a big stigma, and we're still kind of on the fringe, and we don't oftentimes get that level of support from our community outside of the medical cannabis community.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A lot of folks are still very much under attack for their medical cannabis use. They don't feel comfortable letting people know. It's still very challenging. So I think seeing the businesses try to create some sense of community, I think is really wonderful, because also, again, it's about patients getting that access. And, as dispensaries are the front line of patient access. And so seeing the dispensaries kind of really open up in that way has been really great. I think that it can still be challenging. Product availability is just always a challenge, whether it's because of pricing, which could be very valid reasons why the prices are set that way, but it doesn't make it less of a challenge for patients, especially who are paying cash. I think that, having the variety of products available and availability in the sense of, do I have to drive an hour to go get it? We have sick patients, legitimately sick people, and that's a big deal. So, and those things can't necessarily be legislated, right? We're not going to ask for some legislation requiring X product to be only $40. I mean, that's just not how that's going to work. So I think that, having these kinds of conversations and building those relationships and talking about what patients need, maybe even in specific geographic areas, that's a really great place to start.
One of the things that you mentioned that I think is a really kind of crucial point is the idea of community that's built up within patients, within those that have a shared concern or a shared medical condition or just a shared advocacy focus. Kind of what advice would you give for patients that want to have those sorts of communities that want to build kind of grassroots advocacy efforts for communities that matter to them, but don't necessarily know how to start?
Find one other person who's looking at the same cause as you, because that's really all you need. You just, you need one other person, because then maybe they know another person or they have some networks to tap into. And so that's what it's about, is whatever challenge you're trying to address, right? We're concerned about whether the chemicals being used are running off into the water in Maryland. Okay, well, I know so-and-so, they care about environmental issues. Maybe they'll care about this issue. Maybe they don't even know about it, but if I talk to them about it, they might be interested, or they might say, hey, go talk to this person. And I think that's really what happens, is you start to see that snowball effect, right? I care about this issue. Oh, I do too. Okay, well, let's see who else is caring about this issue.
Right.
Someone who's caring about something related to it that we can group up with. Making those connections is really important. That's challenging now during this time of COVID, because we don't have these events that we all used to go to, and that was how you met people. And again, it's about accessing the other patients. So I think that's where dispensaries could play a really key role. Dispensaries are on the front lines. We know that a lot of dispensaries are open to patients coming inside the building again. I know I've seen like bulletin boards at the dispensaries where people can post things up. Right. Ask your local dispensary, can I put a flyer up? I'm looking for people who have MS just like me and use medical cannabis. Or if a lot of dispensaries have weekly newsletters and things, you could say, hey, we have a patient looking for another patient to connect with who's also dealing with X medical challenge. If you're interested, email. So again, it's about making those connections, and how can we help patients to make those connections. And it is more challenging now without our physical events. So I do think we have to come up with some alternate solutions, because that patient support is really just so crucial for everybody.
Definitely. And that actually kind of leads into another question that I had about what cannabis businesses can do, whether they are dispensaries, growers, processors, ancillary or tertiary businesses that exist in the space. What can they do to further the mission of patient advocacy beyond some of the voter initiatives like we have going on this Friday? You mentioned providing a place for patients to build a semblance of community, whether it's posting a flyer or creating a space on a website to say, we're going to be bringing together all of our patient interests, all of our patient concerns, and then putting that out in our newsletter and saying these are things that our patients are concerned about. If there's anything that aligns with your mission or your personal needs, reach out. We're going to help facilitate building this community. So all the onus isn't on the patient, who may not be in a position to build that for themselves. But is there anything else that you feel like dispensaries or some of those businesses that I mentioned could do to help further these sorts of goals?
I think what you said was really key, is not putting the entire onus on the patient, because oftentimes they might not be in a position to do it themselves, right? If you think about, I personally have had many medical crises, and the last thing you can do sometimes is think about all these resources, even if you have them there.
Right.
It can be challenging to do that. And so that's why it's so important that we have, people come to me to ask for things, and I might not have that information, or we might not do that, but I can find someone who does. And so being willing to be that kind of informal intermediary to just really help someone out, oh, hey, okay, you're looking for that. Great. I'll keep it in the back of my head, and I might come across someone in a few days and they say something similar, and I can connect you. And so I think, providing those spaces. I think there's also a lot of really great patient advocacy organizations and patient advocates doing great work already that need support. And quite frankly, they need financial support.
Right.
A lot of patient advocates, that was part of the reason the association came up, is that a lot of patient advocates are spending money out of their own pocket, and they don't have it. And they're not getting support anywhere else. And so, we're trying to do our bit as well to try to raise funding so that we can give out at least small bits of money here and there, or create programming and people can participate without having to pay for some of the overhead and things like that. So, I think that license holders and businesses, whether you're ancillary or inside the actual market, those are ways that you can support. Are you a copying company? We always need copies, do you have an extensive email distribution list of people who would be interested in these issues? And maybe for something, that you really believe in, you're willing to send out an email to your list about it. Those very small ways can go a long way in terms of patient advocacy. Most of us are operating with little to no budget, and we know how to stretch a dollar. And so even, a couple $100s can make a big difference.
Definitely. With the event that we have going on Friday, we're hopefully going to be pulling in many different people from many different backgrounds to lend their support, to get informed, to get registered, to just prepare themselves for, just what's coming and what's happening, and to make the most educated decision possible. So the theme on the event on Friday is, Cannabis Votes 2020. Do you feel that the cannabis patient community and issues related to that community can really help shape the outcome of the upcoming elections?
I really do. Because at the end of the day, we're all here because we want to be in better health and wellness. And, isn't that kind of what we want for our countries and our respective cities and such? And I think that it also, again, there is this stigma about cannabis consumers, about our motivation, our drive, our intellect, right? These stigmas about being a pothead or a stoner. And, cannabis consumers are some of the most intelligent people I know, some of the most brilliant ideas. And so I think that these stigmas that people are placing on us are still just so unfounded. And that's why it's so important that people see cannabis consumers vote, right? We vote, we're taking part in making decisions. We're educated about what policies are trying to be passed, about who's trying to be elected. This project is nonpartisan because what's important is that you vote. Just use your voice. Our voices are the one thing no one can ever take from us. So that's the goal of the project, really, is to bring everyone together to really just understand that we have a voice and we can use it even in that way, right? So legislative session is coming up in Maryland in January, and it's really important that patients and everyone in the community remember that cannabis has a place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that you touched on that I think is still very surprising for me is the stigma that surrounds a cannabis patient or a cannabis consumer or cannabis user. Like you mentioned, I mean, when I came into the cannabis space, I came from a very different professional background. I was working in the IT space. I was working as, requirements gathering and business development and things like that. I wasn't aware of what existed in the cannabis space and how closely it aligned with the things that I had already believed in and was already advocating for. I have various family members that are recovering or dealing with various types of debilitating diseases, cancer survivors, people that are dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. My son is autistic. There's so many things that I knew that I was already campaigning for in terms of their quality of life, their well-being, their interests, and their needs that effortlessly made their way into the cannabis space. And I've been able to meet so many different people from all those different kind of pockets that I mentioned that were willing to work with me, willing to educate me, willing to call me out on the things that I was wrong about or that I had misconceptions about. And I really appreciate that about this community and this industry, is that especially when talking with patients, if there's something that they need, they will let you know. And it is your responsibility to provide the space where they can feel comfortable expressing those needs. And I really, like I said, I really appreciate the fact that the cannabis community is the way that it is. It's just been, a incredibly welcoming and powerful place to just be in and be surrounded by people that really care about what's happening and care about needs beyond themselves is really amazing.
It is. There's a really high level of selflessness in especially the patient community. Patients are always willing to help each other out or help, troubleshoot. Hey, this when I use this is what happened, and this was okay, but this wasn't. What can we do to change it, or how do we, address that? And I think that's really one of the beautiful parts of it, because we know that cannabis has medical and scientific benefits, but because of the challenges in the industry, right, with things like banking and research and legality, federally, we're not able to have the level of medicine that other pharmaceuticals have. And so we've really had to figure it out ourselves. And I know I definitely couldn't have figured it out without the support of my community. And I know many other people that would say the same thing.
Definitely, definitely. I know timing can be a really big key in advocacy work and influencing decision makers, and finding out when key meetings are happening, or when bills are being introduced, or when congressional briefings or court case decisions, or where issues that are specific to the patient community are being discussed or occurring. Kind of what advice would you give for those wanting to work in the advocacy space when it comes to these sorts of strategies and being on top of the timing, so to speak?
Find a group. It doesn't have to be an established group. It can be a group of people who also want to do something. It's a lot. It's a lot to keep up on, especially during session, because things move quickly and you have to check websites to see, are they having a meeting? There's no announcement. We don't get a daily, I don't anyway,
Right.
get a daily briefing telling me everything that's going on. You could miss something and just not know. And sometimes people will not tell you either, who might know, because it's politics.
Right.
And so I think that working in a group makes a huge difference, because we have medical issues, we have families, we have jobs, we have various things going on. And so being able to have people that you can work in tandem with, that you can rely on, that, okay, well, you're going to be maybe the only thing you're responsible for in the group is making sure everyone knows when the meetings are that are occurring, things like that. I think it makes it more manageable, and it makes it more enjoyable. When you're doing it all, it's a lot to manage. So I think definitely finding a group, and then just trying to stay on top of it the best that you can, understanding that, it is politics and it's going to go how it goes.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. How can we engage members of the patient community who may not see the importance of engaging in politics or engaging in voting, especially this year? And why do you feel that this year in particular is so important for that maximum participation from the patient community?
I think that we need to make sure that we have healthcare protections in place, just generally. We know that there are challenges to people receiving healthcare, even now, whether it's the length of time it takes you to get an appointment, to access to your pharmaceuticals. When we're talking medical cannabis, it could be paying for your medications, finding the right products for you, even knowing what the right product is for you, right? A lot of folks rely on traditional consumption methods, which have their time and place as well, but there could be something that works even better for you, and maybe you don't even know. I think that, we know that adult use or recreational use is looming in Maryland. It's coming. And so in terms of the medical market, we want to make sure that medical cannabis patients don't get left behind, that their needs don't get overlooked, because it will be overwhelming when recreational or adult use comes. It's very new, just like medical cannabis was. There's no way to set out a perfect plan to roll it out that isn't going to have bumps. It's just not possible. And so we want to make sure that during that time, medical patients are getting what they need, because there is a difference. And we've seen in other markets where that had some challenges. And so I think it's really important that our legislators, our policymakers, not be afraid to stand up for Maryland medical cannabis and say, I'm going to learn the market. I'm going to learn about what the patients need so that I can advocate for them. I understand it's still a scary time to say that you're involved in cannabis as a policymaker, and I absolutely understand and appreciate that. But it's here. It's already happening.
Right.
And so we all need to be brave and stand up and say, okay, we need to make sure it's happening the right way.
Right. Definitely. So how do you feel, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but how do you feel that the implementation of recreational or adult use, or, however you might want to label it, will change the advocacy landscape? I mean, do you think there are still, obviously there's still some things that will overlap between the two in terms of, getting patients or getting consumers exactly what they need to address their specific condition or whatever the case may be. But how else do you feel like the advocacy landscape might change as a result of recreational or adult use?
I think we're going to have to start focusing a lot more on the stigma. To be honest with you, I think that that's my primary concern, is that with adult use or recreational use, that stigma will become even greater.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've seen what that market looks like in other states, and sometimes it doesn't always look pleasant. That's just the truth.
Yeah.
Because I believe it's because the policies and things were not set out in place properly for it to have that smooth rollout. So it's not necessarily any judgment on any one piece of the ecosystem, to be quite honest. It's just that this is the new industry, and that's kind of what happens sometimes. But my concern is that, especially with our elder population and in our communities of color, that stigma will become even greater because they see some of these other things happening and then automatically put that on medical cannabis patients as well. I mean, you only need to go to the MMCC website to see that there have been little to no problems from patients since the market has rolled out. So, I think that the proof is right there that patients are responsible. Patients are doing what they need to do. They're, those aren't stigmas that we need to apply anymore. Nonetheless, we do know it's there. So my hope is that across the board, advocates start being a little more concerned about that stigma and trying to break that down. Because we don't want, with the stigma comes criminalization. And even if we say we've decriminalized, we know that it's still happening.
Yeah, definitely. Decriminalization does not mean the stigma is suddenly released, especially when we know how much of the stigma is racially driven and how much legalization is a racial justice and social equity issue. But in considering that, and kind of going back to a previous question about what businesses can do, what, in your opinion, are the most effective ways for businesses to help the patient community combat the racial justice issue of legalization when it comes to cannabis?
I mean, and I think the race issue is so huge, especially for our patients, because, as you probably know, decriminalization usually applies to a very small amount. It's an amount that then it's very easy for prosecuting attorneys and law enforcement to use as a scapegoat for contacting usually Black and brown people. We know in our state of Maryland that is happening. So, and it's, people tell me all the time, well, why are you complaining? It's decriminalized. Okay, well, you should look at what that means in real life. Right. And I know, because I hear from people. I'm the one who gets calls. This is what just happened today. So, I think in terms of businesses, what we ultimately need, again, is to convince our policymakers that this is a problem, right? Decriminalizing, a few grams is not really helping anybody. It might make us feel good and feel like we're doing something, but in practical terms, it's not making as much of a difference as we need to. And so I think that, again, and I'm going to use the word lobbying, but I don't necessarily mean paying anyone money, right? Which is the legal term for lobbying, but I just mean in terms of the advocacy. We all can be advocates, and our businesses sometimes are in a better position to do so because you have money. And so I think that when we can join, there are going to be issues that we don't agree on from a patient perspective and a business perspective, and that's just going to happen. But there are some issues that we do all agree on. And I think we all agree that we cannot be consuming and making money off of a plant when other people are in chains and shackles because of it. And so I think that, quite frankly, I think that's an amazing issue for the entire community to rally around, because why should that even be an option for anyone? And so I think that, engaging in that programming when it's available, right? There are organizations we just had an expungement week webinar. We're looking at doing some future programming in that area as well. So you can support organizations like us doing the work. You can partner up and have events, at your dispensary. And then I think also, again, advocating to your legislators, contact your local people and say, hey, Rockville City Council, Rockville Mayor, we want to know how many people were arrested for cannabis last year. We don't like that. Did you know there are, I forget how many dispensaries are in the Rockville area, but quite a few. right?
Yeah.
And so, there are this many dispensaries and we have about this many patients that come through here. Why are we still hassling people for that? So, those things make a big difference. It seems like, oh, it's just an email. They read them. They really do. And so I think those are really small, low cost, no cost ways that businesses can really take a stance.
Mhm. One of the things that I've seen um, within the industry, and I will certainly use my words very carefully, but one of the things that I've seen in the industry, at least from a business perspective, is, and you mentioned this a little bit, is the advocacy that makes you feel good. There's certainly a lot of feel good advocacy versus what I would consider effective and sustainable methods of advocacy. And I'm personally thankful for organizations like yours that are working in the latter and doing the work that is sustainable, that is lasting, that does make an impact beyond this just makes us feel good. But because of the nature of the advocacy work, there are times that it's going to be uncomfortable. There are going to be periods of unlearning for the people that are working within the advocacy to do things that you're going to have to re-educate yourself about because you're confronting a lot of inherent biases that you may have had prior to coming to the industry or prior to starting the advocacy work. So, I'm thankful that, organizations like, the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association are focused on the things that are sustainable, the things that are effective, and educating not just patients, but businesses, organizations, community members, community leaders, whoever, what the methods are to really invoke the type of change that we need to see.
Yeah, and I think just remaining open, because that re-education piece is so important. We understand people come from all over, they come with all different upbringings and things they were taught and implicit biases and all of these things. And, no one comes to the table with all their ducks in a row, right? And that's okay. But it's what you do after that point. It's what you do after someone says, hey, what you just said was racist. Do you say, oh, do you want to have a conversation about that? Can you educate me? Do you feel comfortable educating me? Do you have the energy to educate me?
Right.
Because that's the other thing, is we can't expect Black and brown people to be the educators of Maryland medical cannabis. I know, I'm personally exhausted.
Right.
I mean, I've been exhausted. I went to college and law school and all these other places, all girls, upper class high school. I mean, I was exhausted by the time before I got to Maryland medical cannabis. I mean, we all know that story, right? Sometimes you're the only one. And so it shouldn't be our burden, right? We shouldn't be responsible for teaching non-people of color in Maryland medical cannabis how to behave.
Right.
And so one, I think, we need to be willing to pay people for that work, right? I mean, that is actually a profession. It is a job. And when I get things in my inbox all the time. Oh, I'm going to advise for this company, and I wanted to ask you what you think about this. Oh, it's a quick question. No, that's an hour of consulting time.
Right.
I bring all my collective experience as a Native American, Indigenous, brown woman, as a Latina, to this table. And it can be emotionally taxing to have these conversations. And so I think that emotional labor is something that we need to value more so that we can then be re-educated. And being open to that, and even seeing the value in that, or even saying, oh, wow, yeah, you're right. I didn't even realize I should be paying you for that. Right. So those kinds of things. And so, again, it's really about what do you do after the, faux pas or misstep happens. Do you get defensive and say, well, no, you're just picking on white people, or you're just playing the race card, or that's actually not racist, you're wrong. Right? He shouldn't do those things. Or do you say, oh, wow, I'm really sorry. If you have the emotional bandwidth to have a discussion about that, I would love to be educated. And we see a lot of our businesses are doing that. And that's what I think is so wonderful. A lot of a lot of people in the cannabis community, whether it's Maryland or otherwise, are engaging in those conversations in respectful ways. So I think that's kind of the first step for businesses who are looking to get out of the kind of feel good, what I call social media activism, right? We don't need more memes or black squares. We need actionable items. Tell me what you're actually doing. And if you
Right.
don't have a plan, there are people like me who provide consulting services who can help you figure that out.
Right.
We can come up with a diversity and inclusion plan for your company. We can come up with actionable items for you. So, it's possible. You just have to find it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the kind of last questions that I wanted to ask you, in regards to patients that do have this expertise or members of the community that do have the expertise, how would you suggest that they kind of quantify their experiences, their professional education experiences, things like that, to help fuel when they go to speak to a business or say, like, I was asked to be a part of this. Can you help me figure out what's racist and what's not? Like, how do they quantify their experiences so that when they're approached like that, they can say, well, this is my experience. You need to pay me based on the education, based on the experience, and not even formal education, because there are many leaders that we have in the community that may not have what considers a formal education, but they have a level of experience that more than makes them qualify for the job.
Absolutely. And so please understand too, when I talk about your experience, your knowledge, your education, I'm not in any way talking about letters after your name.
Mm-hmm.
Those can count too, but that's not at all what we're talking about, right? We know just in history, some of our greatest activists and change makers,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't even go to school, or they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't, so that's, to me, is very irrelevant. But I think that that's important because especially, people of color, we're not taught to really value the work that we do. We do a lot of free work.
Mm-hmm.
Patients as well. I know too many patients doing too much free work
Mm-hmm.
and free marketing. And so I think it is really important to put a value. You can even do something as much as like a sliding scale, right? Or you can do a community rate. I do that sometimes, well, if you're in the community or you're a smaller business, you
Mm-hmm.
can have various rates, and, look at like a consulting fee structure. You start to incorporate in Maryland, it's about $200 now. I think they just raised the fee a little bit. And you just do a consulting services by the
Mm-hmm.
hour, or you could do packages even, and set up some sort of structure in that way. And then you can always adjust your rates depending on, who the client is, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you really enjoy the project and it's going to cost, 10 hours worth of work to get it off the ground, and you're willing to only charge them 8 hours or something like that, But I really think that's important for Black and brown people to start asking for what we're worth.
Mm-hmm.
We bring a lot of experience and knowledge into this industry, whether it's from, our experiences living in a legacy market, from our experiences having our friends and family put in shackles and chains because of cannabis. That's invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that can be replicated. You can go to school and get a certain kind of degree, and that is fantastic.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you have a level of familiarity with the plant
Right.
that other folks do.
Right.
And I think that I'm concerned actually that we're kind of letting some of that knowledge and experience go by the wayside, and we're not valuing it for
Mm-hmm.
what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think it's important about finding groups of people who do value what you bring to the table. There are some people who just never will. Don't use your energy on those.
Right.
Right. Find the folks who do. And inevitably they'll start connecting you to other people who will value your work as well.
Right. Well, that was kind of my last question that I had. I really appreciate you taking the time, prior to the event that we have going on tomorrow with the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association, Cannabis Votes 2020 from 4:30 to 7 p.m. When patients come in, you can register to vote, request a mail-in ballot, confirm your polling site, get additional information in regards to educating yourself to prepare for the upcoming elections. Just really soak in as much as you can, just because the people that are going to be here, as you've heard through this conversation, they are knowledgeable about what's going on. They care considerably about the patient community, about the rights and the needs of the patient community, and how that echoes into some of the things that we need to change politically. So thank you very much, Rita Montoya, the founder and executive director of the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association. Again, I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to just kind of introduce yourself to those who aren't familiar, though I I don't know how many people aren't familiar with you and the organization at this point, but just to cover all of our bases, just wanted to make sure that that introduction was made. Just because I appreciate what you do, everybody here at Peake ReLeaf appreciates what you do and what the organization does, and we're just really happy to host the organization tomorrow, just so we can continue to further the work.
Thank you. We're definitely looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
See you tomorrow.
All right. See you tomorrow.